Welcome back. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on President Trump's push to end birthright citizenship. The consequences could go well beyond the scope of this one case that they are hearing. CNN's Paula Reed is outside the court. Paula, tell us, first of all, the highlights of what we've heard so far in English, which is a bit different from what our viewers have been hearing, unless they are, our lawyers are very much, familiar with the language of Supreme Court arguments, but also the big picture of what this could mean.
Dana, I speak fluent justice, and I like to think I speak fluent TV.
You're so exactly the translator we need.
The stakes are really high for President Trump here, because what happens in this case could determine how quickly and effectively he can implement his agenda through executive orders. Because the focus here today is on judicial power and whether one judge anywhere in the country should have the power to block a policy for the entire country, something called a nationwide injunction. Now, these have been imposed against every modern president, but none more than President Trump, because he does so many things through executive order. He has already issued a record more than 200 executive orders, and they've been blocked by these injunctions 49 times. Now, today's case is specifically focused on his executive order ending birthright citizenship. So the right that if you were born in this country, even if your parents are not U.S. citizens, that you are a citizen. And the challengers argue that this is exactly why you do need one consistent policy for the entire country. So if a judge is going to block this, you don't want a patchwork, because they argue it will create chaos. And Justice Kagan, she really hammered President Trump's lawyer, John Sauer, on this issue. Let's take a listen to what she said.
Let's just assume you're dead wrong. How do we get to that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long does it take? How do we get to the result that there is a single rule of citizenship that is the rule that we've historically applied, rather than the rule that the EO would have us do?
It is clear that the liberal justices are not buying this argument from the Trump administration, but they just need 5 conservative justices to agree that not only are these nationwide injunctions being abused, that they are in some way usurping the power that is supposed to be held by the president or by the legislative branch. And Dana, based on the questions that we heard today, it does appear that the Trump administration may have enough justices to either limit or eliminate these nationwide injunctions. And I just want to note, this is not specifically a Trump issue. The past 5 Justice Departments have all opposed nationwide injunctions and said, look, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And look, we'll see what the justices have to say about this when they issue their opinion, likely next month.
Yeah, I mean, President Biden, for example, signed several executive orders that were challenged, and he didn't want his to be overturned in a nationwide fashion either. So that's a really important point. Thank you so much, Paula. I know you'll keep listening. We'll get back to you. And I'm joined here by a terrific group of reporters and analysts: CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, Isaac Dovere of CNN, Jamie Gingell as well, and CNN Supreme Court analyst Steve Vladeck. Steve, I'm going to start with you. Take it away about your big picture overview.
I mean, it's hard to convey briefly just how big a deal the technical, nerdy, procedural issue in these cases is, but it really reduces to the question of whether, when the president does something that perhaps we all agree is unlawful, does every single person who's affected have to bring a lawsuit? Or at least do you have to have a series of lawsuits on behalf of classes of everyone who's affected? Or can you have one, or in this case, 3 lawsuits that tee the issue up to the Supreme Court, that give the Supreme Court a chance to say, this is unlawful, you can't do that? Everyone agrees that once the Supreme Court says this is unlawful, it's a rule for the whole country, and it's a rule that protects everybody. But the fight is over what happens until then. And it takes 2, 3, 4 years for cases to get to the Supreme Court. And so the question is, during that interim period, are we really going to make every single person bring their own case or be part of someone else's case? Or are we going to allow for these kinds of nationwide lawsuits? Dana, the reason why that matters is not just for birthright citizenship, right? So in the birthright citizenship case, you've got 22 states that are plaintiffs, but you have 28 that are not. You have 5 individual named plaintiffs and 1 organization that represents, maybe a couple 100,000 people. But that's not going to cover anywhere close to all of the people who could be affected by this policy. are they going to now have to go bring their own lawsuits? And so the implications here are not substantive. The court is not about to say this policy is okay, but the ruling might have the same effect for so many people.
Let me just stick with you for 1 second, because as we were listening, we were talking about the patchwork. And 22 states sued. I believe we have a map showing this. So if you could explain, if the court goes the way it sounds, just from the way the conservative justices are asking their questions, we don't know how it ultimately would go. But if they say no to a nationwide injunction, and we end up with a patchwork just on this issue alone, on whether or not if an undocumented immigrant has a baby.
Say in Texas.
Say in Texas, which is obviously, you see, not colored in there. It's a red state. They don't want to have anything to do with this lawsuit. What happens? What's the difference between the baby born in Texas versus right next door in New Mexico?
So the baby born in Texas, unless their parents are part of one of those lawsuits in one of those other states, and maybe they could be, but unless they are, the baby born in Texas is not a citizen. The baby born in Texas is subject to removal under our immigration laws. The baby born in Texas is not eligible for an array of medical benefits that any citizen would be. And that's going to vary, Dana, not just state by state. It's going to vary based on, are you a member of the particular immigrant rights group that brought one of these lawsuits, CASA, or are you not? Are we going to require the parents in the hospital to produce their CASA membership card? So, there are good arguments for why lower courts have gotten too happy, too sort of aggressive in issuing nationwide injunctions in the last few presidencies. But there's also something unique on the other side of the equation, which is a president who, whether you think what he's doing is lawful or not, is doing more than any of his predecessors, when, as in this case, there are serious arguments that it's patently unlawful under settled precedent. And when you have the very real concern that that's not going to matter, because in the short term, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans or non-citizens whose kids should be Americans who aren't allowed to benefit from these other more specific court rulings.
And I want you to come in, but I just want to also tell our viewers that the hearing is over. They've adjourned, and so now we're just going to wait to see what the Supreme Court decides.
We already have a bit of an example as to what it would look like if there weren't these nationwide injunctions. And I'll tell you what that is. With the Alien Enemies Act, that sweeping wartime authority that the president has wanted to use to swiftly remove undocumented immigrants, we are seeing a patchwork of cases across the country because those judges have not been issuing nationwide injunctions. So I have been following multiple cases on multiple dockets, and this has become a tricky issue for all of these groups because, for example, there was a judge in one district of Texas that said, no one in my district can be removed under this authority. Except for in another district, there wasn't that ruling. So detainees were moved to that district. And then there was another emergency filing and another evening that said, no, now we need to address this. So we've already started to see what a world like this could look like on this very particular issue because these multiple districts are ruling only for their district. So if that individual is moved somewhere else, then in that area, they could be removed. And it has been really confusing for a lot of attorneys. It's been confusing for the detainees. And it has led to a lot of late nights.
It required the Supreme Court to step back in. So the reason why you couldn't have had a nationwide, the plaintiffs tried a nationwide challenge to the Alien Enemy Act proclamation. That was the case that was before Chief Judge Boasberg here in D.C. The Supreme Court on April 7th says, no, you can't do this as a nationwide suit. You got to go through district by district litigation. In any other administration, that would not have been that huge of a difference because the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security would have said, okay, but we see the writing on the wall. We understand that we have to follow due process. Priscilla's exactly right. What the Trump administration did is say, okay, let's play a shell game. Let's move people into the districts where we haven't lost yet. And the problem is that experience should give us pause.
The key here is the shell, well, one of the many keys here is the shell game. And Jamie, just on the politics of this isn't haphazard inside the Trump Justice Department, inside the White House. This is the kind of strategy that Trump world spent 4 years when Biden was in the White House mapping out.
Right. You stole my word. It is the strategy, and beyond the confusion and the chaos, I think we also have to take a look at this with the words judicial power. So in so many of these cases, President Trump has used very effectively speed as a weapon. And numbers, 200 executive orders, all of these actions. So if you talk to, legal scholars or political people who are concerned about what he's doing, this is a time they will say the red light is blinking, 5-alarm fire. What is an effective check and balance on President Trump? The Republican Congress is not going to stop him. So the fact that this goes to the point of judicial power and these courts, people have been looking at the courts and judges and saying, it's on you. And now, depending on how the Supreme Court rules,
It's going to be on all of them.
yeah.
But I think that seen in the context of the amassing of power by the president here, by President Trump specifically, right? What he has been looking to do, how he's been governing, not by legislation, but by executive order, by going in this big way, knowing that Congress won't check him because of the Republican majorities that have over and over said, I'm with him, or I guess he's doing the right thing. It's not, you've had previous cases from the Supreme Court that have given him more power from this same group of justices. It seems like if the conservative justices rule with him this time, that'll give him even more power. And that is beyond any of these cases. It's a continuing change in what the presidency is and how it will function beyond.
Yeah, and on that note, well, I'm telling everybody the secrets of what we talk about while we listen. But you were talking about, we were all talking about the volume. I mean, you just mentioned it again, Jamie, but let's put some specifics on this, and I'll bring you in on this, Steve. The idea that, over 200 lawsuits on the executive orders, 250 lawsuits on the hundreds of executive orders. We're not just talking about birthright citizenship, which was an executive order on day one of many. There are challenges to him on the way that he has told law firms to do pro bono work for him. The transgender issue, particularly in the military, spending freezes, DOGE cuts.
Firing probationary employees within the executive branch. I mean, what's striking about this is that, no one's ever going to fully agree on which of these policies are more legally sound and less legally sound. That's obviously for the courts to decide. But the volume itself is, Dan, a part of the story because so many folks are affected by so many of these policies. And so, yes, we're focused on birthright citizenship. Let's just take one other immigration case. The Supreme Court has before it right now another emergency application from the Trump administration about something called temporary protected status. That's a case that affects upwards of 600,000 Venezuelan nationals in the United States, where the plaintiffs who have brought that lawsuit don't actually represent all 600,000 Venezuelan nationals. They represent maybe about 14% of that group. Is the Supreme Court really going to say the other 86% of Venezuelan nationals need to bring their own lawsuits? I mean, these are not exactly folks who are in a position to bring these kinds of lawsuits. They may not want to identify themselves given the repercussions they face. And so you can tell this story, Dana, over and over again in every single one of these different contexts where if the Supreme Court were to take away nationwide relief, the undeniable effect would be for the administration to be able to carry out much more of its policies, even in contexts in which the courts believe today, believe tomorrow, and believe always that they're unlawful.
And it's not just, sorry, Dan, it's, to Paula's smart point, this isn't just about the Trump administration. Like, yes, he is trying to amass power, but I have covered multiple administrations, especially particularly on immigration, and the Biden administration also had to wrestle with these nationwide injunctions, not only, by the way, on immigration, but also on student loans and all the rest. And so it also is so difficult for the many people in the federal government who I talked to, who it became a running joke that there would be a policy that would come down from the White House, the Trump White House or the Biden White House, and maybe a week from now probably wouldn't hold.
So as much as we're talking about the process and the implications of the process argument that the justices heard today, the Solicitor General wants this to be about the underlying executive order and the underlying change that the Trump administration wants to make to the 14th Amendment, which is the right to birthright citizenship. I want you to listen to the Solicitor General at the end of the arguments today.
The original meaning of the citizenship clause extended citizenship to the children of former slaves, not to people who are unlawfully or temporarily present in the United States.
So that's, I mean, the president himself put a very long post on Truth Social today to this effect. We don't know, or I don't think that we believe that the Supreme Court will take him up on his offer, Jamie, to actually make a ruling about the underlying question of whether changing birthright citizenship in the way that the president wants is constitutional. But it is interesting that that's what the Trump administration is asking for.
I think that was for an audience of one, Donald Trump.
And it came up a couple times in the argument. I mean, Justice Kagan brought up in a series of exchanges the fact that the Trump administration actually specifically did not ask the court to take up the merits, that the only thing the Trump administration asked the court to do today was to freeze these 3 different injunctions as applied to anyone other than the plaintiffs. And what's striking about that is the court has the power to decide this merits question now. It could do something called granting certiorari, how it usually hears a case before judgment, leapfrogging over the Court of Appeals. The Trump administration hasn't asked it to. And so Justice Kagan says, well, how are we going to get to the merits? When are we going to get to the merits? And what's going to happen until then?
And can we put back up the states map? Because even though, as you very smartly explained, this won't, if the conservative justices do side with the administration and they say this injunction will not hold, that it's got to be state by state, it won't just be state by state. It's going to be the actual people who sign on to the lawsuits. However, Isaac, just looking at that map, what I am struck by, just on the politics of this, is let's just say that on this issue, and then perhaps some of the other issues that we've been talking about, it's done effectively state by state. The divide, the political divide that we already see and feel in this country will get even deeper.
Yeah, I mean, that's the electoral map, basically, that you're showing, right?
Exactly.
With the exception of Pennsylvania as, I guess, the swing state here. We are polarized more than ever. We are pulling ourselves apart as a country in so many ways. This seems like it would lead to more of that, right? And these questions, but even district by district, but state by state, that it matters. You think about what Steve was laying out, that you could have someone born in New Mexico versus born in Texas, and is a citizen born in New Mexico, but not in Texas, a citizen not of New Mexico or Texas, a citizen of the United States.
Exactly.
That's a really, I think, for people to start to internalize what this is talking about, it changes so much and tears us even more apart. I think that the other thing here is that you have a situation where we are 120 days into the Trump administration at this point. We don't have the Trump administration asking for birthright citizenship ruling now, but there's a lot of time here to go. You can see that part of the strategy from the Trump administration, from Trump himself, is move a lot, move quickly, and we've got 3 years and 9 months or more of the Trump presidency.
Well, and one of the sort of quirky but important things to point out is the government these days pays very little price for losing these cases in court. Right? It pays almost no political price. Trump says, listen, I fought, I tried to get it, I was blocked by the courts. The worst thing that happened is a policy that was unlawful is stopped. We don't have, as we had in times past, a robust ability to sue the government for money damages, for example, when they break the law. And so every incentive, whether you're a Democratic president or Republican president, is to try to get your agenda out there and to push the courts to block you. And if you take away the power of courts to block you on a nationwide basis, you're going to push that window even further.
And I got as far as taking the LSAT, so like, but,
Oh, you did?
but I did. And I disappointed some people that I didn't go all the way. But
Some people, meaning your mother.
you said it, not I. What happens if there is someone, if we go forward in this, and there's someone who is a citizen born in New Mexico and wants to have the rights of citizenship in Texas? Would there be a court challenge that way? I mean, is it terrible?
Before you answer that question, I'm sorry, I'm going to put a pause on this because I do want to get to CNN Chief Supreme Court Analyst Joan Biskupic, who is now outside the court. Joan, you were inside for the arguments. What stood out most to you?
It's as if neither side has something that's really a winner right here, right now, Dana. You know, you have a Supreme Court that's been extremely frustrated by lower court judges in applying these universal injunctions, so that these universal orders that would block a president's agenda. In this case, of course, blocking President Trump's effort to lift birthright citizenship. But as much as they're not crazy about that, I felt that Solicitor General John Sauer's argument really met a lot of resistance in terms of what he was trying to do, saying we want to come and challenge these injunctions. We want to be able to put at least part, if not most, of the policy in place to lift birthright citizenship throughout the country without having you really consider the merits. And several of the justices raised questions about how you necessarily have to think about the constitutionality of birthright citizenship. You know, it was not lost on them that what the Trump administration is challenging here is something that has been embedded in the national consciousness, that, you know, is part of the 14th Amendment, that was reaffirmed in the 1898 case of Wong Kim Ark. So, you know, I could feel that there were several cross currents there. Yes, they seem to be open to saying that anyone who's going to challenge a policy has to bring it in some sort of class action, but they also seemed not quite receptive to do what the Trump administration wants to do at this point, whether they asked for more briefing on the merits question or they issued the most minimal order ruling possible. I'm not sure which way they're going to go. Thanks, Dana.
Joan, thank you so much. Always great to have you. You understand all the quirks and the facial expressions and the tone of voice and everything better than anyone. Everybody stand by. We are also following breaking news overseas, where President Trump is in Abu Dhabi meeting with the president of the UAE. We'll talk about that next.